The bell above the chapel rang sharp and heavy through the quiet morning air. It was not Sunday service that called the people of Black Hollow today. It was something colder, something darker. The townsfolk emerged slowly from their homes' mothers. With bonnets, men with rifles slung across their shoulders, children clutching the hems of dusty skirts. They came not to worship, but to witness. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of fear. But none came out of kindness. At the steps of the weather-beaten church stood Clara Whitlow, hands bound, her pale blue dress ripped at the hem. Her cheeks were dirt-streaked, eyes swollen from a night in the town's makeshift cell. Her lip bled, cracked from the dry wind or maybe from the sheriff's backhand, it wasn't clear which. But she stood tall, shoulders trembling but not bowed. Sheriff Grant tightened the whip in his hand. He was a large man with a face like granite and a reputation carved in cruelty. He wore no badge. None was needed. His authority came not from law, but from fear. Clara, the orphan maid who worked in the mayor's kitchen, had been accused of stealing a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk for a child. The town had seen the boy, a dark-haired kid no older than 6, skin thin to the bone, shaking behind the water barrels behind the general store. Clara had slipped him food when she thought no one watched, but someone did. And here she stood now, sentenced without trial, in front of the very place that taught mercy and grace. Justice will be swift today, the preacher had said from the church doors, but his voice cracked. Even he knew this wasn't justice. It was spectacle. The first crack of the whip hadn't yet fallen, but the air already shivered with tension. Dust curled like smoke beneath Clara's bare feet. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not in search of pity. There was none. Just blank faces, blank hearts. One woman turned her gaze away, shame flushing her cheeks. A baby cried. A man hushed it, and then a whisper passed through the crowd. "Who's that?" A figure leaned against the wooden railing just beyond the church gate. His silhouette was long, lean, unmoving. A wide-brimmed hat shielded his eyes. His coat hung heavy over one shoulder. No one had seen him arrive. He hadn't come with the crowd. He hadn't come at all. He'd simply been there. Is that she? He didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just watched. Clara caught the motionless figure in her periphery. For a moment, the burn of fear in her chest flickered. Who was he? A drifter? A bounty hunter? The town was full of strangers lately, but there was something strange about how still he stood, how silently he observed. The sheriff stepped forward, raising his arm. Stealing from the mayor's home feeding. Beggars, this is what happens when you forget your place, girl. Another murmur rippled through the crowd. The preacher said nothing now. He simply stared at the ground. Clara flinched at the sound of leather pulling tight. The sun blazed high above, casting long shadows like fingers stretching across the earth. Cowboy didn't move, not yet. Clara's eyes locked on the horizon behind the crowd. Somewhere out there was the boy she'd tried to save. Somewhere, she hoped, someone kind had found him. Someone who wouldn't tie him up and parade him before a church. And then the bell rang again. But no one had pulled the rope. It swung once, then stopped. Clara's breath caught. The sheriff paused, momentarily uncertain, and the cowboy stood up straight. For the first time, he stepped forward, just one slow, deliberate stride. Heads turned, eyes widened. His presence now couldn't be ignored. Clara didn't know who he was, but in that moment, she knew one thing clearly. Something was about to change, and it began with silence. The sheriff's arm rose high, whip taut. In his fist, the leather glinting like a serpent's tongue under the blistering sun. The crowd braced themselves. Children were pulled closer. No one spoke, and then, with a whistle through the air, the first lash fell. Crack. It struck Clara's back with a force that made even the bravest in the crowd flinch. Her body recoiled forward, A cry caught in her throat. But she did not scream. She gasped short, sharp, but held herself upright, fists clenched, knuckles white around the fraying ropes that bound her wrists. Blood trickled through the torn fabric of her dress. A gust of wind swept across the churchyard, lifting dust into the air. It curled around her bare feet like a storm waiting to break. The sheriff stepped back, preparing to strike again. His face was blank, his lips thin and colorless. His eyes scanned the crowd, daring anyone to look away. Most didn't, but no one. Stepped in Dot at the edge of the gathering. The silent cowboy stood still. His shadow now stretched long across the dusty earth. His hand rested near his hip, not on his gun, but close enough that some noticed. The preacher's gaze flicked toward him, then quickly away, as if eye contact might invite something he couldn't contain. Nobody knew his name. No one even knew how long he had been in town. Some whispered he'd arrived the night before. Others swore he'd been living in the woods for months, watching from afar. All they truly knew was this: he never spoke, never smiled, and never let his gun speak unless it mattered. Clara turned her head slowly toward him, wincing through the pain. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. He didn't nod, didn't flinch, but something passed between them, an understanding that no words could hold. The sheriff's arm lifted again. Cracked. The second strike was worse. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself before hitting the ground. The crowd shifted uneasily. An old man removed his hat, pressed it to his chest, and whispered something only God could hear. Still, Clara said nothing. She would not cry in front of them. Not for these people. The cowboy took another step forward. One boot, then another. The sound was subtle but heavy, like thunder that hadn't yet decided to strike. A few townsfolk near him moved aside instinctively. No one dared stop him. Sheriff Grant, sensing movement behind him, half turned his head. His brow furrowed. "You got business here, stranger?" The sheriff called out. The cowboy didn't answer. Grant chuckled, but it was nervous, thin, artificial. "You best keep moving, son. This ain't your fight." Still, no response. The sheriff's fingers tightened around the whip handle. "Don't be stupid." But the cowboy didn't need to speak. It was in the way he moved, slow, deliberate, unfazed. He stopped no more than 10 feet from Clara, arms still at his sides. His eyes scanned her bloodied back, then shifted to the sheriff. For the first time, Sheriff Grant hesitated. It was like facing a wall. Not of flesh or brick, but something older, colder, unbreakable. Clara's breathing slowed. Her knees finally gave way, and she dropped forward, landing hard on the dusty ground. The crowd gasped. And in that single, drawn-out breath of silence, the cowboy took one final step forward. The sheriff stepped back. That step, just one, was enough to change the air. The birds stopped singing. The wind died. The preacher dropped his Bible. The cowboy reached down, not for his gun, but for something tucked under his coat. A cloth. He knelt beside Clara, carefully placing it under her head, lifting her slightly off the dirt. His hand was rough, calloused, but gentle. Clara blinked through the haze. His face was hidden in shadow, but she felt something warm and safe. Sheriff Grant stood frozen, his whip dangled by his side, suddenly feeling like a child's toy. The cowboy didn't speak. He didn't need to. Clara was not alone anymore, and that terrified the town more than any bullet could. The heat was thick, pressing down like a judgment all its own. Clara's breath came in short bursts as the dust beneath her lips clung to her skin. Blood soaked through the side of her dress, but she wasn't thinking about the pain. She was staring at him, the stranger, the cowboy. Silent, expressionless, but somehow more present than any man she'd ever known. Their eyes locked, and it was as if the world slowed down, like time itself held its breath. His gaze wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind, either. It was something deeper, something ancient, carved from silence and storms. The kind of look you gave someone when words had long since lost their meaning. He knelt beside her again. His hands hovered over her back, not touching, just ... waiting. Watching ... and for the first time in hours, Clara's lips parted, not to cry, not to plead, but to ask, why? But the words never came, because he looked at her with something more powerful than answers. Truth ... and pain ... behind the cowboy, the sheriff, had stiffened. His hand hovered near the butt of his revolver now, jaw clenched tight. His pride weighed heavier than the weapon at his hip, and that was saying something. All eyes had turned from Clara's wounds to the two men in the center of the yard, one breathing heavy from rage, the other silent as dust. The sheriff barked, "I said this ain't your business." Still, the cowboy said nothing. He stood slowly fluid, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't need to speak. The way he moved was enough. Like someone who'd already decided how this would end, like someone who had nothing left to lose. The preacher stepped forward, hand raised. "Let him be, Sheriff," he said softly. "He's not here to fight." But the sheriff didn't want peace. He wanted to finish what he started. This girl broke the law. This town has rules. If outsiders start interfering, the cowboy took a single step toward the sheriff. It was enough. Sheriff Grant's hand faltered. Everyone could feel it. The shift. The tension wrapping around their throats like a noose. The cowboy stopped just a few paces from the sheriff. They were nearly eye to eye now. The sun beat down between them, slicing long shadows across the church walls. For a moment, it looked like the sheriff might draw. He wanted to. He needed to. His authority was slipping with every heartbeat. Then something unexpected happened. Clara, weak and bloodied, sat up. She didn't cry out, didn't beg. She simply pushed herself to her knees and looked between the two men. Her voice cracked, dry as bone. "Please," she whispered, "no more." The sheriff scowled. The cowboy turned to her, and then he took off his coat. It was dark, heavy, made for cold nights and long rides. He stepped past the sheriff without breaking stride and knelt once more beside Clara. With utmost care, he wrapped a coat around her trembling frame, shielding her from the wind and stares alike. She held it tight, not because of the cold, but because in that moment it was the first kind thing anyone had done for her in months. The sheriff was shaking now, not from fear, but fury. "You think you can walk in here and make a show of me?" he growled. "You think that coat makes her innocent?" The cowboy stood once more, turned fully to the sheriff, and for the first time he moved his lips, not words, just a breath, just enough for the sheriff to see the name stitched inside the coat's lining. E.J. Cade. The sheriff's eyes widened. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. "Cade? Elias Cade? That's the one who, the war. The sheriff's brother." But no one dared finish the thought out loud. The preacher looked toward the sky as if trying to recall something buried deep in Scripture. Clara looked up, confused. The cowboy's Cade's eyes never left the sheriff's face. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his hand. He simply stood there. And in that quiet, that heavy pause, something broke inside Sheriff Grant. He stepped back. Not much, but enough. Cade turned to Clara. She understood. Now this wasn't just about her. This was redemption, vengeance, carried in silence. The silence between Elias Cade and Sheriff Grant was suffocating. Not a whisper moved through the crowd now. Even the wind, once restless, had settled as if the earth itself refused to disturb this moment. Clara sat hunched on the ground, Elias's coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Blood had dried on her temple. Her breath came slow, uneven. But her eyes never left the man standing between her and the one who hurt her. Elias didn't speak. He never did. The sheriff finally lowered the whip. Not out of mercy, out of uncertainty. You think you're saving her? He hissed. She's just a servant. A thief. This ain't your business, Cade. Cade's jaw tensed, but his hands remained still, unarmed, calm. Somewhere in the crowd, a boy whimpered. The child Clara had fed. Hidden now, just beyond the corner of the churchyard, watching with wide, terrified eyes. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew Clara was hurt. Elias turned slightly toward the boy's hiding place. Just enough to show Clara he knew the real reason she stood whipped and bruised. A mother noticed the glance. Her hand went to her chest. He knew, she whispered. He knew the boy was hers? Sheriff Grant stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. This is a lawful punishment, he growled. You think one man's silence can overrule the law? Elias said nothing. He simply did the unthinkable. He walked past the sheriff, right past the badge, the whip, the power dot, and knelt beside Clara again. Gently, he loosened the ropes that dug into her wrists. His hands were rough, fingertips, worn from work and war, but his touch was tender. He untied her bindings with quiet precision, never breaking eye contact. The townsfolk watched like ghosts. No one moved. No one dared. The ropes fell away. Clara didn't cry. Not yet, but her shoulders dropped. The pain hadn't gone, but something heavier had lifted. Then Elias did something that made time stop. He slid one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her into his arms. The crowd gasped, not because of the strength it took, but because of what it meant. He was claiming her. Not as property, not as a cause, but as a human being, a soul worth protecting. He turned back to the sheriff, not aggressively, just fully. Standing still now, Clara cradled in his arms like a scarred bird finally free from its cage, and even without speaking, the message was clear. Enough. Grant single quotes S lip curled. His hand twitched near his holster. You draw on him, and you'll hang before sunset, someone muttered behind him. The sheriff's head snapped around. What did you say? But he already knew. Town was shifting. The silence of Elias Cade wasn't weakness. It was judgment. And it was spreading like wildfire through the people who had stood by for too long. The preacher finally stepped forward. His face was pale, voice shaking. Let her go, Sheriff. Let them both go. Grant looked around. No one would meet his eyes, except Cade. And Cade never needed to speak. He just held Clara tighter and began to walk past the pulpit, past the judge, past the man with the rope, past everyone who'd said nothing until now. His boots echoed on the wooden steps of the church as he descended with her in his arms. Clara, through tears and blood, whispered the first word she could manage. Why? Elias didn't answer, just looked at her quiet, steady, unshaken. And somehow that silence answered everything. No words were needed. The churchyard held its breath. Elias Cade carried Clara like she was made of porcelain, yet burned by fire. Her blood had dried, but the pain lingered in the tightness of her jaw, the shallow pull of her breath. She clutched his coat around her shoulders like it was the last piece of her dignity. The sheriff didn't move. His hand hovered over the grip of his revolver, fingers twitching like a man fighting ghosts. Elias's back was to him now, exposed, unguarded. All Grant had to do was draw, fire, and silence the man who'd stolen his control. But he didn't, because something deeper than fear crept up. The sheriff's spine uncertainty. Not about Elias Cade's aim. That was legend, but about what came. After the bullet, there was something final in Elias's silence, something that echoed louder than thunder across the boards of the old church steps. Every footfall Elias made was a challenge. Every step away from violence was a louder statement than any showdown. And that, more than a bullet, broke the sheriff's confidence. A child began to cry in the distance, a soft whimper behind the rusted water barrels near the general store. Elias paused, turning his head slightly. He didn't look directly, but he knew the boy was there, Clara's boy, the one she'd protected, the one she'd bled for, the one she'd never claimed out loud. Her voice cracked. "You saw him?" Elias nodded once. No words. No judgment. Just understanding. He stepped down onto the dusty road, past a line of townsfolk who parted like a river. Women who had once whispered that Clara was cursed now bowed their heads. Men who'd shouted for justice now looked at the ground, ashamed of their silence. Sheriff Grant's voice finally rang out. "You walk away now, Cade. What's to stop others from doing the same?" Elias stopped, turned, but he still didn't reach for the gun on his hip. Instead, he met the sheriff's eyes. Long and hard. And then, very slowly, Elias placed his hand on his holster, not to draw, but to unbuckle it. He let the belt fall from his side. The gun hit the dust with a soft thud. A gasp rippled through the crowd. He was giving up the weapon that had made him a legend. Sheriff Grant blinked, unsure. "What are you doing?" Elias stepped forward unarmed, carrying Clara with only silence and strength, and said nothing. But in that one act, he spoke more than any threat could. "I don't need a weapon to end you." The sheriff swallowed hard. His hand lowered from his own holster. He couldn't shoot an unarmed man in the back. Not even he could come back from that. Especially not Elias Cade. Especially not now. The preacher approached cautiously. "This isn't law anymore, Sheriff. This is reckoning." Clara stirred in. Elias's arms, whispering something only he could hear. He stopped, bent his head closer. She tried to speak again, lips trembling. "They'll come after me again." Elias looked at her, then at the people around him, eyes full of shame and fear. Then he did something no one expected. He turned back around, walked right up to the steps of the church again, right up to the sheriff. Clara flinched, expecting a fight, but Elias simply shifted her in his arms and stared at the man who had whipped her. No challenge, no hatred, just a look that burned through the man's skin. And then, softly, Elias raised his voice for the first time. One word. "I remember." It was gravelly, worn, as if it hadn't been used in years, but it hit the sheriff like a shot to the chest because he knew what Elias meant. This wasn't about Clara. This was about her. The one Elias had lost. The one Grant had let die. Elias didn't. Need revenge. He was the revenge. And as he turned once more, gunless, wordless, and walked away with Clara in his arms, the sheriff didn't follow. Because even cowards know when judgment has already arrived. Boots against dust. Silence thicker than gun smoke. Elias Cade walked with Clara in his arms down the single street that carved through Black Hollow, a street that had seen gunfights, hangings, weddings, and funerals, but never this. Never a man like Cade, carrying a woman the town had just condemned, walking away with no words, no fear, no weapon. Only judgment. The townspeople watched, frozen. No one cheered. No one jeered. Just silence, like something sacred had been broken and no one knew how to mend it. Old Miss Breyer, who sold thread and candles, whispered through dry lips, "He walks like a man who's already buried us." Behind him, the sheriff remained. On the steps, staring, his whip limp in his hand, his pride shattered. He didn't follow. Couldn't. Not now. Not after that look. Not after that single word. "I remember." The preacher had lowered his Bible. A few townsfolk trickled away, pretending to have chores. Others lingered, rooted to the spot by something unspoken. Clara clung weakly to Elias, her face hidden in the folds of his coat. She couldn't see the faces of the people who had let her be dragged, beaten, nearly broken, but Elias could. And he didn't blink. He made them look at themselves. Each step he took was a sentence passed. Each silence a mirror. They came to the general store. Closed now, shutters drawn, but Clara remembered its porch where she had passed the boy a crust of bread, where Mrs. Weller had hissed, "Charity breeds thieves," where Mr. Tanner had looked the other way. Now, none of them came out. None dared. At the well, a girl no more than 10 watched with wide eyes and whispered, "Mama, is he taking her away for good?" Her mother didn't answer. Elias paused. Just briefly, shifted Clara's weight gently, and glanced to the edge of town. The boy was there, hiding, peeking from behind stacked crates, mud on his face, a crust of dried food clutched in his hand. Clara followed Elias's gaze and saw him. Her breath caught. "My son." Elias didn't speak. He just gave a slight nod. Permission. Clara turned her head and whispered hoarsely, "Run to me, baby." At first, the boy didn't move. Then, barefoot and shaking, he stepped out from the crates. Each stride was uncertain. His legs were small, but his courage was growing. He reached them. Clara reached down with what little strength she had left, fingers shaking, and pulled the boy against her side. Elias adjusted his hold, cradling them both now, mother and son. Clara sobbed softly into her son's hair, whispering promises she was too weak to keep. But Elias stood tall, spine straight, and he kept walking. Past the saloon. Past the old gallows. Past the place where once, long ago, his sister had begged for help and the town had turned its back. No one spoke of it now, but everyone remembered. He had been just a boy back then, and the girl who died had worn her hair like Clara's, long, dark, unbraided. She'd pleaded for bread, just like Clara, and they had whipped her too, but there had been no one to carry her away. That was why he had returned. That was why he didn't draw his gun, because this wasn't about killing. This was about making them live with the weight of what they had done. Clara's son asked, "Where are we going, mister?" Elias looked down. "Home," he said, quietly. It was the second word he had spoken all day. The boy blinked. "Do we have one?" Elias nodded. "Once, you do now." And with that, they passed the last house in town. The road turned to open land, dry but wide. Sky above them open like freedom. No fences, no judges, no gallows. No more looking over their shoulders. Just land. And silence. And healing. Behind them, Black Hollow stood still, burned not by fire, but by shame. And Sheriff Grant? He stayed. Where he was, watching Cade disappear into the horizon like a ghost who had finished what he came for. Not revenge, but redemption. They walked until the dust no longer clung to their clothes, until the wind softened and the shadows stretched behind them instead of ahead. Elias led them across the valley, a place unmarked by maps and untouched by Black Hollow's rot. Here, the land breathed. It didn't whisper of punishment. It didn't echo with whip cracks. It only listened. Clara had drifted into half-sleep by then. Her son, tucked into her arms, clutched her tightly as if he might be torn away again. Elias carried them both. His arms, worn from labor and silence, did not waver. When the sun dipped behind the hills, a shape rose from the dust like something carved from the earth itself. A small ranch, modest, weathered, half hidden by a crooked oak that leaned like it had seen too much. The porch sagged, the chimney was cracked, but smoke curled from its crown like a quiet invitation. Clara stirred. "Where is this?" Elias didn't answer at first. He walked up the steps and used the heel of his boot to push open the door. It creaked like a memory. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and old books. Dust motes spun in the fading light, and the walls bore marks of a life once lived: scratches, chipped paint, an old rocking chair that still swayed slightly as if someone had just left it. He laid Clara gently on the bed nearest the fire. Her son curled next to her, eyes already slipping shut. Still, Clara wouldn't rest. Why did you bring me here?" she asked softly. Her voice cracked like dry timber. Elias didn't speak. He just poured water from a jug, soaked a cloth, and gently began to clean her wounds. It stung. She didn't flinch. Because for the first time, the pain meant something. It meant survival. As he worked, her eyes traveled across the room. There were signs of someone else. A second bed, neatly made. A comb on the windowsill. A dress hanging behind the door, small, faded yellow, child-size. Clara swallowed. This place. It belonged to someone, she whispered. Elias's hand froze for a second on her arm, then resumed. She was your... Clara stopped herself. She's gone, isn't she? Still, he didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. His sister, maybe more. Whoever she was, she hadn't made it out like Clara had. And this house, this land, was all that was left. You lost her, Clara whispered, voice catching, and now you've brought a stranger into her place. Elias finally looked at her. His eyes, always calm, were deeper now. Wetter, but still silent. She lowered her gaze. You shouldn't have. He stood, walked over to the fireplace, and picked something up from the mantel. An old locket. He placed it gently in Clara's hand. Inside was a drawing, faded and simple, of a girl with Clara's same long, dark hair, and beside her, a boy, younger, eyes hard to read. Elias as a child. The resemblance was unmistakable. She looked like me, Clara whispered. Elias gave one slow nod. Did they hurt her? A pause, then a second nod. Clara didn't ask more. She couldn't. Elias knelt beside her again. This time, not to tend her wounds, but to sit beside her. Not to protect, but to stay. The silence between them grew heavier, but it wasn't the same silence from Black Hollow. This one was sacred. She stared at the fire. I've never had a place that was mine. Not really. Her son stirred beside her, whispering, Mama? She brushed his hair. It's okay. Where? Safe now. Then she looked at Elias again. Are we? He didn't answer, but his coat still lay folded near the foot of her bed. His gun was still outside on the porch, left there on purpose, and he hadn't left her side once. So she answered for him. Double quotes, yes, she whispered. They stayed like that, 3. Souls stitched together by silence, scars, and a house that had once held sorrow but now offered something more. A beginning. Outside, the stars arrived without warning, and far in the distance, the wind carried the faintest sound from the church bell of Black Hollow. But here, there was only quiet. Days turned into weeks. And in that quiet house beyond the dust, Clara began to heal. She no longer woke in the middle of the night gasping, her hands clutched around phantom ropes. The bruises faded, the pain softened, and, most unexpectedly of all, her voice returned. Not all at once, but in bits, like lost birds finding their way home. She began helping Elias fix the porch, wash the windows. She read aloud to her boy each night, her voice low and steady by firelight. And sometimes, as Elias sat nearby with his back to the door and his gaze on the hills, Clara would watch him. She never caught him off guard, but he knew. He always knew, and he never left. He didn't speak. Not after that single word in town. I remember. But he didn't need to. The land responded to him. The boy followed him, and Clara trusted him. Still, something lingered. A question neither of them asked aloud. A thread left untied. Why her? One night, as wind whispered against the windows, Clara stood barefoot in the kitchen, drying her hands. Her son was asleep, curled with the dog Elias had found in the hills. The fire crackled softly. Elias sat at the table, sharpening a small blade. Though no trouble had come. Maybe he wasn't waiting for trouble anymore. Clara stepped toward him. I need to ask something, she said. He looked up. She swallowed. Why me? His eyes didn't waver. I wasn't your sister. I'm not brave. Like her, or like you. I didn't do anything to deserve your protection. I was just a maid. He leaned back slowly, the blade set down. And for the first time in all those weeks, he rose not to leave, but to walk toward the hearth. He knelt, pulled up a loose floorboard with a soft creak. Clara tilted her head. From the hidden space, he lifted a worn cloth bundle. He set it on the table and gently unwrapped it. Inside, folded with care, was a letter, faded ink. Old seal. He pushed it across the table to her. Clara opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was careful, feminine. The name at the bottom hit her first, Elias Cade. Elias's sister. Read the words. If you ever find another girl like me, Elias, don't let her die alone. Don't let the town decide who gets to live and who gets to be forgotten. I had no one. But if there's another, give her what I didn't have, a chance to be seen, to be held, to live free. That's all I ever wanted. Clara's eyes blurred. She looked up at him. You kept this? Elias nodded once. She folded the letter again, holding it against her chest. Her voice broke. She was just a girl? He looked into the fire. And for the first time, Clara saw the pain he carried, not worn like a wound, but buried like a grave inside him. She stepped closer, her hand hovering near his shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. Still, no words from him, only the flicker of firelight in his eyes. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of grief, of memory. Of promises kept. Clara placed the letter beside the locket on the mantel. Two ghosts watching over them now. One never forgotten. One saved through the other. She turned to Elias. You gave me a life, Elias Cade, she said softly. You gave my son a future. You gave justice where there was none. Then her voice dropped. What will you do now? He paused, then turned, picked up his coat from the chair, and draped it across the table. He sat back down, stared at the fire. Staying. That was his answer. Clara smiled through her tears. She sat beside him. And for the first time since her life had nearly ended in front of that cursed church, she felt like she was beginning. No titles, no chains. Just truth. And silence. And somewhere in that silence, she heard love,